Welcome back, everybody. And thanks for sticking with us. This is episode 24. It's been a long time in the making, but yeah, thanks for tuning back in. And we're happy to be back in front of the camera and in front of the microphones and give you guys some updates on what's been going on and hit you with a cool episode this time with a little bit of a story and hopefully some cool key takeaways that people can learn from and really try to mitigate their risks of building a custom home with the wrong builder. So, little teaser there, but yeah, Brian, what's been going on?
Busy to say the least, but we can't use that as an excuse. As we've said before, we really enjoy doing this and getting this content put out there for our listeners, and it's been really gratifying. We've heard from more of you in the last few months about feedback on the value you're getting out of this or things that we can talk about, and we're extremely grateful and appreciative of that. So, as Stephen mentioned, we're excited to talk today about something a little different than our typical format, where we want to cover just general custom home building process knowledge and the like. Really, just want to talk about a story of some homeowners that approached us, and we're in a really bad situation. So, tell the story and then talk about how you and we can avoid being in that situation in the future. So,
Yeah,
Stephen, I'll let you run
awesome.
with that.
Way to tee it up. Yeah, so we had a very sweet couple, reach out to us, and they were in an unfortunate situation. Had started building a home on their personal land. They had already owned the land, had done quite a bit of work to the land to get it ready for this home build that they wanted. It's their dream home, had been saving for it for a long time. Their kids are out of the house. They're now new empty nesters, and we're really looking forward to this new build in Central Texas. Now, we had actually quoted the project from the beginning, typical classical contractor story, but they got multiple bids. Of course, ours was not the lowest, and you'll see why in just a minute. But ours was right in line with what the home should have cost, or probably did end up costing. But somebody had come in cheaper with a cheaper cost or a cheaper quote, and ended up ultimately winning the job from the beginning. So we basically wrote it off as an abandoned lead, and we lost that one to another home builder, but we'll get there, right? Fast forward several months. So anyways, home starts building. We didn't really keep up with it. Sure enough, about probably, I would say 10, 12 months after we quoted it, I'm not quite sure, but it might have even been longer than that. We get a follow-up phone call from these folks, and it wasn't a good phone call, right? They're explaining this home that they had started building with the other builder. The other builder had gotten them all the way through the build until they got to basically right before sheetrock. We call it the mechanical phase, where they had put the rough HVAC in, all the duct work. They had put most of the electrical lines in the boxes. They had put the plumbing in. Framing was complete. The weatherproofing on the outside was complete. I'll put that in quotes there, right? That it was supposedly complete. Things like that, right? Everything was supposedly complete up to that point. Before the homeowners felt comfortable hanging sheetrock, um, they checked in with the builder. How are we doing on budget? And also wanted to get an inspection, a third-party inspection, because they had some red flags that had popped up from the beginning of the build or the first half of the build. Now, they actually lived next door, so they were watching this build occur the whole time. It was going slower than they were anticipating or slower than they had been told by the builder. And there were definitely some red flags, like I mentioned. So, um, all that to say that they reached out to us. Brian and I went out there. We looked at the project in its current state, and man, we were disappointed, shocked, very taken aback, to say the least, by what we saw on site, and that a home builder could actually do that to one of their clients. It was very shoddy work. Looked like nothing had been engineered. The weatherproofing was falling off the house. Now, I don't know. I'll give the builder maybe the benefit of the doubt here that whether it was installed incorrectly or the elements had just beaten and battered it over the time that the home was sitting there while these poor folks were believe, in a lawsuit with the previous builder, and getting engineers to come in and analyze things and make sure everything was right. So the home was sitting there probably for, I think, 4 or 5 months before Brian and I were even contacted, and were asked to come out and take a look at what was remaining and see if we could salvage the project, I guess is the best way to put it. But really, like I said, I mean, just an unfortunate situation for these homeowners that we were wanting to come in and save the day and rescue things, but the state of the build was just, I mean, it was in disrepair. Like I mentioned, the weatherproofing, the roof was only halfway done. So every time it rained, I mean, there were spots that weren't fully dried in on the roof and were leaking on the HVAC equipment. Now the electrical wiring, plumbing, of course, can get wet at that stage, but it was not a good situation. The framing was getting rained on, all that stuff. And just repetitively, it was sitting in that state for too long without any progress occurring. So, I think, the homeowners were in actually a pretty positive mood about it. I think they just chalked it up as it is what it is. We learned our lesson the hard way that, we shouldn't have gone with the cheaper quote, but here we are trying to circle back with Brevin Homes and you guys on a quote that you quoted us in the beginning. And we understand we're over budget from what has been completed versus what we've paid at this point, but we want to finish this home. So how do we salvage this? And that was basically the conversation and what we walked into at that point. But yeah, it was a really messy situation and something that we never want to see anybody have to go through. So that's why we're telling this story and hopefully mitigating, like I said, some risk or some of these pitfalls that maybe some of you listeners can hopefully avoid. So yeah, Brian, I mean, explain some more about what we were looking at when we walked into that and what the homeowners were feeling and stuff.
Yeah, we could describe countless issues for longer than anybody wants to listen to this podcast, and that's the really unfortunate thing. And pictures probably do this a little more justice, but obviously, for the sake of doing this with audio, we don't have pictures to show. But as Stephen mentioned, there were structural issues, HVAC issues, plumbing issues, electrical issues. The fireplace had just been installed, and it was sitting on some cinder blocks. And I don't even think, Stephen, if I recall correctly, that it was plumb and square. I think it was even it was like leaning on its side. So just as you mentioned, really shoddy work. But imagine you find yourself in this position and you say, how did we get here? Right? These poor homeowners, as Stephen mentioned, they were so sweet, so positive as they find themselves in a terrible situation because of decisions that they made. Imagine putting yourself in their shoes, and how do you make sure that you don't happen to fall into that same hole against everything you think you're doing right? Here you are, you're in this position. So there's several takeaways that we wanted to talk about here with this story, and I think the first one, and in no particular order of importance, is doing more due diligence on the builders before you ever sign a contract, right? And going with the cheapest builder oftentimes, and we actually have another situation more recent that we'll talk about at a later time, similar story, but slightly different. Going with the cheapest builder has caused much heartburn and much pain. So not that the cheapest builder is always the worst or always the best, but you really, really, really have to do your due diligence all around on choosing the right builder for you. And price is only one small piece of that equation. And we have another podcast episode earlier. I forget what episode number it is, Stephen, but talking about how to choose the right builder for you. So I would say that that at a high level, that's one of the most important takeaways is they chose the wrong builder, and this builder went out of business, took too much money, you're quickly into lawsuits, and whether it was malicious or unintentional, it doesn't matter, right? The homeowner is still having to deal with the aftermath.
Yeah, absolutely. In that selecting a builder podcast episode, by the way, was number 5. So if people want to go back and listen to that and what we discussed on that, definitely a good one to go back and double check. But yeah, I want to say that you're right. It's finding a reputable builder from the very beginning. And I think reputable is a really important word there. That do your due diligence. It's got to feel right. They have to have a track record of being able to build the quality of home that you're looking for. And asking a lot of questions, how do you guys do this? How do you ensure this? How do you guys manage our budget? How do you help us keep track of the build especially if we're remote and not living right next door like these folks were? Imagine you live in California and you're building a home in Florida. I mean, you can't go there every weekend. You can't even go there probably every month. So you really have to have a way of trusting your builder, getting status updates, making sure that things are progressing on the correct timelines and the correct budget and all that kind of stuff. So there's just a lot to think about, but not to scare anybody. This story is meant as a cautionary tale. And, it's one of those things that when you're building a home, and actually I'll add a little bit to this story, these folks were building in outside of city limits. There was not really any local jurisdictions. It was just in the county. In the county, the only thing that they required an inspection or a basically verification for was the septic. So this home hadn't even gotten to the septic, unfortunately. The county didn't really care. I mean, there were no permits that were needed to be submitted. It was out in the middle of nowhere. And unfortunately, that just presents or creates a world of problems when it's a shoddy builder that's not engineering anything, is not getting all the quotes that they need to up front, and is not doing quality inspections or quality walks throughout the build. Very, very important things to make sure your builder's doing. For instance, and for reference, I mean, we do 2 third-party quality inspections throughout the build, and actually really 3. We do a foundation inspection before we pour. We do a post-foundation inspection by the foundation company to make sure that it was poured properly, test everything before we get too far along. We do a phase 1 inspection, as we call it. So when we're about to start hanging sheetrock, it's basically a pre-drywall inspection. Checks everything behind the walls, tests the plumbing, tests the sewer systems, all that kind of stuff. Everything that you want to know before you start covering it up. We test all that. We check it. And then we also do a final inspection with a third-party company. So it's not biased. It's not Brevin Homes. It's not Brian and Steven or anybody else from our company walking the home and giving a biased opinion. It's truly a third-party unbiased company that comes in and gives it a very, very matter-of-fact inspection and then gives us the report, and we fix the items before we move to the next phase. So just an example of what should be happening on any build, whether it's in the middle of the country with no jurisdiction or in the middle of New York City. And those bigger cities have their own inspections and their own city officials and things like that that govern most of those builds, but something to be very aware of.
Another thought you might be having is, how did the homeowners let this get this bad and go this far without stopping it? And I think that the homeowners were speaking up. They were talking to the builder. Obviously, we were not around at that time, but from what they shared with us, they were saying, "Hey, this doesn't look right. Hey, this is off. Hey, this can't be this way." And the builder charged forward, and then ultimately it came crashing down whenever the builder just said, "I have no more money. It's not working." Ran away. And so the takeaway from that is, don't be afraid to speak up, like it sounds like they did, but also demand that work comes to a stop, or work comes to a halt until things are organized between you and the builder and any other third parties that you choose to hire. as we have said on other podcasts, there's a saying, slow down to speed up. And while you want your home to be completed as quickly as possible, obviously for your personal best interest, but also financially, whether you have a construction loan or something else, the faster you build, um, typically the better that is. But it can't come at the sacrifice or the loss of quality. So I think it's important in this situation that if you find something going the wrong direction, or even if you're not sure, you're not ever expected to be the expert. That's why you hire a custom home builder. If it just doesn't seem right, you tell the builder, hey, I need clarification on this. I don't know what I'm talking about, but I don't like this. And if they don't react or respond the way that you expect them to, you ask them to put a halt on construction and get the appropriate people in as early as possible, because a lot of these issues could have been eliminated even if they had continued to move forward with this builder, if they just stopped construction earlier, saying, let's not go move forward with electrical when we're not ready for that. Because the electrical wiring that we saw was all tangled. It was all the wires had been run throughout the house, but nothing was labeled, nothing was organized. And frankly, a new electrician's going to have to come in, and now they're going to have to pay extra to take all of the bad work back out and start over from scratch. So these people are not only in for additional costs for somebody else to pick up the the problem as a general contractor or home builder, but the new trades that are going to have to come in to clean this up are also going to be charging more than if they had started with a blank slate.
That's a great point. And to your point, yeah, if they would have halted construction when they started realizing things were going awry, they could have probably stopped it before the electrical was run and further issues were created. The longer you wait to make that call and stop construction and, like you said, slow down to speed up, the worse it gets. And unfortunately, the bigger the budget issues become and the bigger the timeline delays become, because you got to work backwards to then go forward. But yeah, and I want to mention too that this was not a small, low budget home either. It wasn't like this was some mom and pop builder that came in and just quoted the cheapest price for a small, quick build. I mean, this was a very nice, big home, had an elevator, had an in-law suite, had a 4-car garage. I mean, it was a very nice home for Central Texas and where they're building it. So this can happen across the board. I mean, we've seen it, and unfortunately, the bigger and the nicer the home, the bigger the problems become. The budget's bigger, the timeline's bigger. There's more room to miss your target on a build of that complexity as opposed to a smaller, easier build. But still, either way, you can run into these kind of problems. So, yeah. I mean, Brian, anything else to add on the actual story component of this, or is it best to jump into the lessons learned, or maybe some takeaways on how our listeners can avoid this kind of pitfall?
No, I think that there was so many things wrong with that house, as we've already mentioned, that it's maybe I'll jump to the conclusion, Stephen, but we took a good hard look at it. We were appreciative of the offer we got from, or the opportunity that we got to come help them. But with where we were in our business at that time and the projects we had in front of us, we had to politely decline even pursuing that any further. So we didn't get into discussing what a pricing or a contract would look like to finish the job. But yeah, for those of you that were wondering, we did not pursue it, but certainly wanted to share our story with you to help make sure that you can try and avoid the same mistakes. So no, nothing specific, Stephen, in terms of what we walked into, but yeah, let's cover a few more takeaways or other things to think about.
And I do want to say, I mean, we did go and spend some time, walk the home with that couple, and we did want to just provide as much help and value as we could. And also it was the same time we were walking it to see if it was something that we could help salvage and take on at that time. But like Brian said, it just didn't align with our current workload at the time. So as much as we would have loved to help them and bring that home to the finish line, it just didn't make sense. But I also want to mention too, this is one story, but we've been in business for shoot, you know, almost a half a decade now, and we've seen this multiple times. So it's not that uncommon, unfortunately, and it's something that we wanted to talk about because it's something we've seen multiple times, which is very, very unfortunate that it's happened that much. And we've seen it that much just in our area of building and in our time of building homes. So yeah, as much as we can prevent people from running into this, the better. So I think with that being said, let's jump into some takeaways. I think starting from the very beginning, um, a lesson learned with this particular project. Like I said, we quoted it. These other builders, maybe multiple, but definitely the one that got rewarded the job, quoted it as well. Maybe they didn't even quote it. Maybe they just estimated it and said, yeah, I think I can build this home for X price. Didn't do any legwork, didn't do any quoting, didn't go out and get any bids from any of their subcontractors or whatever, but just said, yeah, I built one around the corner that was kind of the same. Yeah, let me throw a price out. So we don't know what happened, but maybe it was something along those lines. And that's something that you definitely want to be aware of. Where are the builders that you're shopping, where are they getting their pricing from? Is it going out and doing the legwork of tracing down over 200 material quotes and labor bids and things like that are all going to go into your particular home? Or are they just producing an estimate and saying, yeah, we've built some other ones and we think yours is going to come in around this price? Well, that's not your home. That's not your lot. So don't take that for face value.
I think that's really valuable, and a lot of builders do that, right? They say, well, this is our average cost per square foot. When you're building a custom home, as we have learned, Stephen, and let's talk about that in one of our next episodes. I mean, the house could be identical, and the only thing that's different is the foundation and the topography of the lot, and it can change the total price that the homeowner has to ultimately absorb and take the impact on of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we're not talking multi-million dollar mansions, right? We're talking uh, 3,500, 4,500 square foot slab with with no other crazy features, and that's how much it can swing.
So another takeaway too that we want to mention is, how is your builder updating you throughout the build and really keeping you in the loop on not only timeline, but the budget and the quality of the build? Are they sending you those inspection reports that they're doing? Are they sending you the financials of the build in real time, whether it's their construction software or, I mean, we've even seen builders send every invoice, which there's room for error there. Are they keeping you up to date on the timeline of the build and doing progress walks, which we call them? Basically, there's phase walks that we're doing throughout the build that constantly we're getting homeowner input. Does anything need to be changed? We're addressing change orders at that time, checking in. I mean, basically, that's what it is. It's the builder and the homeowners putting their heads together at different phases of the build to make sure it's progressing to everybody's liking. Um, so open communication, we've said it on pretty much every one of our podcasts, but it's so important with the builder and the homeowners that that open channel of communication is there, and the homeowners feel like they're very aware of what's going on with their asset, their home, their money, their financing, all that stuff. Um, yeah, I think those are pretty much the big takeaways. I mean, am I missing anything, Brian?
No, I think we covered them at a high level. There's a lot more takeaways that are in the weeds, but frankly, as a prospective home owner of a custom home, you don't need to know all those details. You're not expected to be the expert. That's why you hire a custom home builder that you go back to what we always say, that you can trust and that you have confidence in, that can build the home to your liking at the quality you expect, the price you expect, within the time frame that you expect.
Yeah, I think that nails it, Brian. I think that, those are the things that people need to be looking for. when they're looking for a builder that they trust. And hopefully this podcast episode has helped the listeners be more aware of this huge pitfall that we've seen, like we said, multiple times, not just a one-off. So definitely something that we're trying to help as many people avoid as possible. And working with a professional builder will be the biggest asset you can have on your custom home. So yeah, good episode, Brian. Thanks for your thoughts, and this different of an episode with a little bit of storytelling, but hopefully the listeners gained a lot of value out of it. So yeah, thanks again, and I think that's a good wrap up there.
For sure. Thank you.
Awesome. We'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks.